The night you got what you wanted, you ended up in a bathroom. Maybe it was after the call. Maybe after the message came through, the one you'd been waiting weeks for. Months, maybe. The bathroom wasn't significant. That's exactly the point. You just ended up there, standing in front of a mirror you weren't really looking at, water running in the sink because you needed something to do with your hands. And inside that moment, inside the thing you'd spent everything building towards, you felt nothing. Not overwhelmed, not relieved, nothing. A specific textured nothing. Like someone had turned the channel off but left the screen lit. You looked at yourself in that mirror. You expected to see someone different, someone who had finally arrived. Someone whose face would confirm that the years of pushing and sacrificing and choosing the work over everything else had added up to something visible, something you could see on your own face, and the face looking back was just yours. Still, unchanged, unmoved, you turned the tap off, walked back out, smiled when it was time to smile, and you never told anyone what happened in that bathroom, because there are no words for winning and feeling like you've been robbed at the same time. Because you knew, even then, standing in that quiet, that saying it out loud would make you sound like a person who deserves nothing. And so you filed it somewhere internal, somewhere without a label, and you moved on the way you always move on, which is fast and forward and without looking back at what you just left on the floor. The most honest moment of your life wasn't your worst day. It was that one. And here's what no one will say to your face. That emptiness wasn't ingratitude. It wasn't a glitch in the moment. It wasn't you being broken or difficult or impossible to please. It was the most accurate signal your nervous system has ever sent you, and you buried it under a new goal before it could finish speaking. This is what it was trying to say. There's a name for what you experienced, but the name isn't the interesting part. The interesting part is the mechanism. Because what happened to you wasn't ingratitude, and it wasn't depression in the clinical sense, and it wasn't a character flaw dressed up as philosophy. What happened is that your nervous system, the one that was shaped long before you had goals, long before you had ambitions, long before you had anything to prove, was never wired to receive, only to pursue. Neuroscientist Kent Berridge spent years separating the brain's wanting system from its liking system. Two different circuits, two different experiences, two systems that most people assume are the same thing because they've never been given reason to notice the gap between them. And for some people, for you, those circuits got calibrated so early and so quietly that winning stopped feeling like anything at all. You didn't fail to feel joy. You were trained out of it, and the training didn't happen in a classroom. It didn't happen in a single event you can point to and say, there, that's where it started. It happened in the accumulation, in the thousand small moments where your environment taught you what mattered and what didn't, what got responded to and what got ignored, what made you real in the eyes of the people whose eyes were the only eyes that counted. The training was quiet, it was structural, and by the time you were old enough to have goals, it was already finished. Your brain doesn't run on achievement, it runs on anticipation. Dopamine, the molecule everyone misnames as the pleasure chemical, peaks not when you get the thing, but in the seconds before you get it. The moment of arrival is, neurochemically, a comma down. Always, for everyone. This is not a malfunction, this is design. The brain was never built to enjoy arrival, it was built to pursue it. Arrival is only useful as a confirmation that the pursuit was correct, a brief signal before the system resets and begins scanning for the next target. For most people, the landing is soft enough that the satisfaction of having fills the gap between the dopamine peak and the reset. The warmth of accomplishment cushions the drop. For you, it didn't. And that's not random. That gap, the space where satisfaction was supposed to live, was shaped before you were conscious of being shaped. Berridge called this the wanting-liking split. The wanting system is ancient, relentless, and extremely loud. It fires in the chase. It lights up on the approach. It gives you the electricity that powers the late nights and the early mornings and the refusal to stop. The liking system, the one responsible for the quiet warmth of actually enjoying something, of sitting inside an experience and feeling its full weight, is smaller, quieter, and deeply affected by early emotional experience. If your early environment was high pressure, if love came attached to performance, if the people around you responded to your wins but not to you, not to the version of you that existed in between the wins, then the liking system learned to stay small, learned that arrival was never the point, that the only safe posture was the pursuit, that the only version of you that mattered was the one still moving. So you kept moving, and now you've arrived. And the wanting system is silent because the goal is gone, and the liking system never learned to speak. The emptiness isn't the absence of success, it's the shape of the hole where enjoyment was supposed to live. Think about the last time you were genuinely physically still, not between tasks, not planning the next move inside the quiet, actually still in your body without the background noise of what you should be doing or what comes next. Most people have to search hard for that memory. Some people can't find it at all, because the stillness, the real kind, feels less like rest and more like exposure, like standing in an open field with nothing to hide behind. And you've been moving in part because moving is the only version of yourself you know how to be without feeling afraid. Here is something you have probably never let yourself think completely. You did not just want the goal. You needed it, not for the result, for proof. Proof that you were worth something, proof that you had earned your place, proof that the version of yourself that worked and sacrificed and delayed and chose the difficult thing when the easier thing was right there, that version was real and valuable and could not be dismissed. The goal was evidence. And evidence was what you needed because somewhere underneath the ambition there was a verdict that hadn't been settled. A question about your own worth that stayed open because the answer, whatever it was never given to you freely. It was always conditional. It was always attached to something you had to do first, which means the goal was never really about the goal. Alan Shaw's research on early attachment shows that the brain's right hemisphere, the seat of emotional regulation, of felt sense of self, of the raw experience of being a person rather than a function, is shaped almost entirely by relational experience in the first 2 years of life. Not lessons, not instruction, attunement, the back and forth of being seen by another person and feeling that seeing register in your body as safety. When that attunement is present, the nervous system learns that being is enough, that you do not need to earn your place in the room, that your existence is not contingent on your output. When that attunement is disrupted, when the environment around you said, implicitly or explicitly, that your value was performed rather than inherent, the right hemisphere encoded a different lesson. Not a belief you can locate and argue with, a physiological truth, a wiring so deep it precedes language. If the relational environment said you are good when you perform, then the nervous system encoded performance as the condition for existence. Not a strategy, a survival necessity. You didn't become ambitious because you were driven. You became ambitious because stillness felt dangerous. Because the moment you stopped achieving, you stopped having proof. And without proof, there was a version of you, small, unconfirmed, waiting just underneath the surface, that had no language yet, just feeling, just the faint vibration of a question that has never been answered. Am I enough without this? The win was supposed to answer it. Instead, it removed the noise you were using to drown it out. And now the room is quiet. And that voice, the one you've been outrunning since before you knew you were running, is just sitting there, looking at you, not angry, not demanding, just present in a way that the work never allowed it to be. And you don't know what to do with a presence that doesn't need anything from you. You've spent your whole life managing expectations, producing results, giving people something to point at, a presence that simply is, that simply waits, that is almost more frightening than failure. So you do what you always do, you turn the tap back on. You give your hands something to do. You start planning. You set a new goal almost immediately. You probably already have. You told yourself that's what disciplined people do. You told yourself momentum matters, that you can't afford to lose the habit of forward motion, that successful people don't stop to wallow, they adjust and keep building. You told yourself rest is for later, or some version of that sentence you heard once, in a voice that mattered, and absorbed so completely you forgot it was ever someone else's. But watch the timing, not the goal itself. The timing, how fast you moved, how little space you allowed between the arrival and the next departure. That speed isn't discipline, it isn't ambition, it is a reflex. A trained, automatic, pre-conscious reflex that activates the moment the current task loses its ability to organize your anxiety. That speed is what a nervous system does when it has never learned that the gap is survivable, when it has only ever known that movement is safe and stillness is exposure. That speed isn't ambition, that's avoidance with good branding. Bessel van der Kolk documented something in trauma research that most people apply only to catastrophic events: war, abuse, disaster. But the mechanism runs at a much lower frequency than that, through much quieter lives. When the body hasn't been allowed to complete an emotional experience, it creates a substitute, a loop, a repetition that mimics forward movement while circling the same unprocessed center. The body keeps returning, not because it enjoys the pain, but because the experience was never finished, never allowed to move through its full arc, from sensation to meaning to release. And so it loops, and in a person whose unprocessed experience is not a single event, but a chronic condition, a childhood of performing, a lifetime of proving, the loop doesn't look like a trauma response. It looks like productivity. It looks like work ethic. It looks like someone who just really loves to build things. You don't keep striving because you love the striving. You keep striving because stopping means arriving fully in your body in the present moment without a task to hide behind, and that arrival has never once felt safe. The goal is a controlled crisis. Think about what a crisis does. It gives the nervous system a clear external problem to organize around. It cuts through ambiguity. It tells the body exactly what to feel and when to feel it. A person in the middle of a goal is a person whose anxiety has been redirected into something legible, something that can be solved, something that promises resolution at the end. Remove the goal, and the anxiety has nowhere to go. It turns inward. It becomes the low, sourceless dread of a person who has no idea what they are supposed to do with themselves in the absence of a problem. A problem to solve keeps you from becoming the problem you haven't solved. And the moment the goal ends, the nervous system panics quietly and gives you a new one, immediately, automatically, without consulting any part of you that might have wanted a different answer. The new goal arrives like it was always there, waiting. And maybe it was, because the nervous system, trained on chronic striving, has a library of contingencies ready. The moment one purpose closes, another opens. Not because life demands it, because you cannot tolerate the interval. Not because you are ambitious, because you are afraid of what you would find if you stopped. Here is something that almost no one who studies high achievers says out loud. The people who are most capable of sustained, extraordinary effort are often the people with the least capacity for sustained, ordinary being. The correlation is not accidental. The same early environment that produces relentless drive, the high-pressure household, the conditional approval, the love that came with requirements, also produces an internal architecture that finds rest intolerable, that reads stillness as neglect, that confuses peace with the absence of proof. These people build remarkable things. They produce at rates that others find impossible to understand, and they arrive again and again at the finish line of their own making and feel the same thing every time. Nothing, or something so close to nothing that the difference barely matters, and they tell no one. Because you don't tell people that success feels like an empty room, because success is supposed to be the answer. And if the answer doesn't answer anything, then the question must be wrong, or you must be wrong, and either way you keep that to yourself and build faster. The research on this pattern runs deep. Mary Ainsworth's attachment studies, originally designed to observe infant behavior, later extended across decades of developmental psychology, identified a pattern she called insecure avoidant attachment. Children who learned early that expressing need produced no consistent response, that the safe posture was self-sufficiency, that affect, the open, unguarded display of emotional experience, was either ignored or unwelcome or too unpredictable to risk. These children grew into people who did not know they were avoiding. They thought they were being independent. They thought they were being strong. They thought the preference for task over feeling was a personality trait rather than a survival strategy they had adopted at an age before survival strategies had names. They grew into people who are very good at goals and very uncomfortable with arrival. They grew into you. The wanting system fires beautifully in a person like this. It is almost perfectly tuned. The pursuit is clean, efficient, and for stretches at a time, it produces something that almost feels like aliveness. Not the warmth of genuine satisfaction, but the electrical current of the chase, which is its own kind of living, and the person in the middle of the chase mistakes the current for the feeling they are chasing. They think, "This is what I wanted." This sensation of movement, of forward motion, of being someone with a purpose, and a deadline and a trajectory, this is what success feels like. And then the goal ends, and the current stops, and they are left standing in a bathroom, water running, face in a mirror, waiting for the feeling to arrive. It doesn't arrive, because the feeling was never at the destination. The feeling was the road, and now the road is gone. There is a phenomenon in neuropsychology called hedonic adaptation. The brain, regardless of what experience it encounters, returns to a relatively stable emotional baseline. Positive events produce a temporary rise. The rise fades. The baseline reasserts. This is not unique to you. It is universal, a feature of the system rather than a flaw in the person. But hedonic adaptation does not happen at the same rate in everyone, and it does not interact the same way with every psychological architecture. In a person whose liking system is already muted, already calibrated small by an early environment that made enjoyment conditional or irrelevant, hedonic adaptation doesn't just return them to neutral, it returns them to a neutral that was never particularly warm to begin with. The spike of achievement resolves not into contentment, but into an amplified experience of the flatness that was always there underneath the chase. The baseline was always this. The goal was just loud enough that you couldn't hear it. The emptiness is not the absence of something. That is the part that is hard to sit with. The emptiness is the presence of something, the presence of who you actually are, stripped of the role, stripped of the performance, stripped of the thing that told you that you were useful and therefore real. Under the achievement, there is a person who has never been given the sustained experience of existing without justification. A person who learned so early it doesn't feel like learning, that bare existence was not enough, that you had to bring something to be allowed to stay. And that person has been living inside every version of you, inside the student, inside the worker, inside the builder, waiting in the quiet for a moment exactly like this one. Vincent Felietti's ACE study, one of the largest investigations into the long-term consequences of early adverse experience, found that childhood stress doesn't just shape behavior, it restructures the body. The HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system, the machinery your body uses to detect and respond to threat, recalibrates its sensitivity based on the earliest lessons about what the world requires. A nervous system that learned early to expect demand, to expect evaluation, to expect that safety was conditional on performance, sets its threat threshold low and keeps it there. It runs hotter than it needs to. It responds to the absence of a problem as though the absence is itself a problem. It cannot distinguish between peace and the eerie quiet before something goes wrong. And one of the quietest, most persistent lessons a person can absorb, not through trauma in the dramatic sense, but through the daily texture of an environment that valued output over being, is that existing without producing is exposure, that stillness is a kind of nakedness, a vulnerability with nothing between you and the judgment that, somewhere early on, felt permanent. So the self that emerges under achievement is a managed self, controlled, legible, acceptable. It knows what it is for. It has a function, and a function is a form of identity, and identity is a form of safety. And when the achievement ends, that managed self loses the structure that made it coherent. The scaffolding comes down. And what stands there without it is not broken. Nothing about this is broken, but it is unfamiliar in a way that the body reads as danger. Unfamiliar, to a nervous system trained on threat, reads exactly like danger. And here is the part where most conversations about this pivot toward solutions, toward practices, toward the idea that if you just adjust your relationship with achievement, if you just meditate more, or journal differently, or build in recovery rituals, the emptiness will resolve into something manageable, something you can optimize your way out of. That pivot is a lie. Not because those things are worthless, but because they address the symptom while leaving the architecture untouched. You cannot journal your way out of a nervous system that was built in a different decade by a different version of the world in the body of a child who had no say in any of it. The wiring is deeper than the practice can reach. And offering a practice to a person with deep structure wiring issues is like offering a coat to someone whose house is on fire. It's not wrong. It's just not the point. The point is something harder. Here is what the emptiness is actually telling you. Not that you chose the wrong goal. Not that success is meaningless. Not that you need a smarter relationship with your ambition or a cleaner framework for wanting things. Not that you should want less or be more grateful or learn to appreciate the process rather than the outcome. None of that. All of that is management language. All of that is designed to keep you functional inside the same structure that produced the emptiness in the first place. What the emptiness is telling you is this: you are a person who has been trying to answer an existential question with an instrumental solution. The question, "Am I enough?" is not a question that achievements can answer. It was never a question that achievements could answer. It was posed before you had achievements. Before you had the concept of achievement. It was posed in the earliest architecture of yourself, in the wordless pre-linguistic register where the body learns what it is and whether it is safe to be it. And every goal since then has been an answer written in the wrong language. Precise, effortful, expensive, and completely illegible to the question that actually needed responding to. The goal was not the problem. The belief that you needed it to exist. That is the wound, and the emptiness after winning is the first honest moment you've had in a long time. Not because it feels good. It doesn't feel good. It feels like the specific grief of realizing something was wrong long before you were old enough to name it, but because it is accurate. Because for once the noise stopped, the project closed, the dopamine dropped. And something underneath all of it, something that has been waiting patiently with the kind of patience that only very old pain can afford, finally had enough quiet to surface. You just weren't expecting it to feel like grief, but grief is exactly the right word. Not grief for the goal that ended, grief for the version of you that never got to exist without one. The child who was real before they were useful. The person underneath the performance who has been waiting for someone, for you, to stop moving long enough to acknowledge that they are there. That is what is sitting in the bathroom with you. That is what is looking back from the mirror. Not failure, not ingratitude, not a flaw in your character or a gap in your psychology that needs to be closed. Something older than all of that. Something that has been trying, in the only way it knows how, to get your attention. And here is the thing about grief that no one tells you when they are trying to be helpful. It doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to be witnessed. It wants you to stop moving long enough to look at it directly and say, "I see you. I know you've been here. I know I've been running." The witnessing is not the cure. There is no cure, not in the way that word implies a return to some prior wholeness that may have never existed. But the witnessing is the beginning of something different, something that is not the same loop, the same cycle, the same bathroom in a new city after a new win that produces the same specific textured nothing. You will probably set a new goal soon. Maybe you already have, and it will work. For a while, it will work. The chase will return, and the wanting system will fire, and the electricity will come back, and the flatness will recede into something that almost resembles aliveness. The project will give you language for yourself again, purpose, direction, a reason to be in motion that feels clean and earned, and you will think in those moments that the thing in the bathroom was just a moment, a tired moment, a moment that doesn't define you. But there will be another arrival, and another bathroom, and another face in the mirror that looks exactly like yours, unchanged, waiting for something that the goal did not bring. And the question underneath it all will still be there. Not louder, not angrier, not impatient, just patient in the way that only very old things can afford to be. Patient because it has been waiting since before you had words for waiting. Patient because it knows, even if you don't yet, that you will keep returning to it. Not because you want to, not because you chose to, but because the body always finds its way back to the unfinished thing. You will return to it every time the noise stops, every finish line, every milestone, every moment the work pauses long enough for the silence to be audible. And maybe one time, not now, not yet, but one time, you will be still for long enough to hear what it is actually saying. Not what you fear it is saying, not the verdict about your worth that you have been running from since you were old enough to run, but the actual thing, the real thing, which is quieter than the fear told you, which is sadder and stranger and more human than any goal you have ever chased. The question is not what do you want next? The question is, who are you when there is nothing left to prove? And the harder question underneath that one, the one you are not ready for yet but that is already waiting, is whether you can survive meeting that person. Not survive in the dramatic sense, survive in the quiet sense, in the sense of remaining in the room with them long enough to learn their name. Because they have one. They have always had one. You just haven't stopped long enough to ask.